Hello, listeners. On this episode, my newer friend Faith, who I met at an OTL dialogue, look for that bonus episode where I share about, with some other friends, our experience at an Oriented to Love dialogue. And anyways, I met Faith there, who is just a absolutely brilliant mind. I love the way she thinks, the wisdom that she carries. And so I was very honored for her to have questions about the development of my own community house. And so she joined in for an episode asking me questions about how the community that I live in has developed. And yeah, her questions just really got me thinking as well of just how we can continue to become all that God has for us as a community embedded in a really precious neighborhood. So enjoy the conversation.
All right.
Good to see you. You have a very lovely video podcasting background.
Well, this is just I'm often right here. So just like the bed with the clothes is true, the food that's on my other desk, but like right here, just,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah. I just try to just I had a Canadian flag and an Arizona flag where I was born, and like, oh, I'll just hang those and cover stuff up.
yeah, hang things. And of course, I like your little book plant situation right there. You can't tell that this plant is, this is this plant has it's the
Mm.
ceiling.
Oh,
It has another plant on it that's unaliving itself. And so I was like, can anybody tell? No. So, all right. So I'll just follow my curiosity. Um, I, I think I told you while we were at the event together that I feel like I was born for the commune, right? Like the
mm,
idea
mm-hmm.
of shared resourcing and support. I was saying to somebody that Bruce Perry's work on trauma was very impactful to me. The what of it I saw, and one of the things that he said is that we lived in people groups of 150, 200 people, and every child had six adults. And what
Mm,
we're doing right now is just so unsustainable for life, right? And
mm-hmm.
so I felt like I was validated in this day. Yeah, how do we actually do community? And to face the honest reality that so much of our history has taught us how to not do community, like
Mm-hmm.
has reinforced, certain ideas. And so when I think about culture design in workplaces to to kind of heal some of the harms that work has perpetuated, I think it has to be by making work a community. So
Mm.
I became curious when you spoke about, wait, so how are you doing this with five, six people? Because I think that's the ideal tech team, project management team. Like I like to work with a team and I'm like, okay, so that's the size. So I'm like, what are you doing?
Mm.
Just kind of the backdrop of my own curiosity. Not to mention, if I had the money, I'd create the commune and then,
Yeah.
so start just tell me a little bit about how at the beginning, how did that idea kind of come together, like, catalyze with whoever, like what made you
Mm-hmm.
decide
Mm-hmm.
to start this? And are you okay
Yeah.
if
It.
I eat my fruit while I'm
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Eat away. It is breakfast time. I just had the joy of eating some eggs that I collected from our chickens yesterday. So that's our maybe our most direct way of trying to bring a little bit of economic life into our community of like, oh, we can, share our food scraps with the chickens and they can share extra eggs with us.
slowly?
The one hen, I was like, oh, I think she's really, we don't have a rooster, so they're not going to hatch, but she was really trying to just sit them and keep them warm. And so I had to lift her up. I'm like, sorry, you're going to have to surrender that dozen of eggs you're hiding there. Uh, it started for me just in uh, a Christian college, Northwestern, where I went and living in the dorms and being like, oh, this is great. Just being around people. And there's so much in the Bible that talks about encouraging one another and these types of things that can only happen if you see each other. And then after college, I moved into a kind of fraternity house that turned into a young adult community house. People in college, post college. So there were 20 to 25 young adults living together in this big house with a coffee shop on the main floor. Maybe a couple people worked in the coffee shop, owned by the same kind of ministry nonprofit. And then I was just like, okay, I can only live on frat row for so long. What does this look like in a normal neighborhood? Just where there's kids on the block and it's just a part of life. So I started looking around at different models, looking at different communities, and wanted something that just for me, the heart was what are the kind of bare bones for an intentional Christian community. And so it was like, okay, we have to have at least a weekly meal and we have to have at least some type of regular time of prayer together. There's a spiritual union in our community. And so I ended up a friend, Elena, at church. We ended up talking and our kind of desires were aligned. And so that was the one thing the Lord humbled me and realized, oh, I can't start a community alone. Like, of course, because that's even so much part of the American, like, oh yeah, just like get as much power as you can to make your vision come alive. And the African proverb of, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And there's no way that I would have been able to come this far if I had been in this alone. Just trying to pull people together. And so there's still that question of just, Lord, what partners do I need to pursue the things that you've put on my heart?
Yeah.
And really praying about that partnership, or partnerships. And and so this house, when I was just looking at, okay, what's a house that has at least 4 bedrooms, has a little prayer nook, has a big enough kitchen where we can fit in there, make stuff, at least decent sized dining room to gather people. And over the years, the word household has begun to be very meaningful in my vocabulary as differentiated from community, because community can be a very big thing, a very small thing. It can mean a lot of things. But household has a lot of specifics around kind of what you're describing, this like, oh yeah, 5 or 6 person team where we're doing stuff together. There's an economy of the house that has to kind of work in order for us to flourish and be able to do things for each other and with each other. And and so that's why like dishes are always at the heart of any household or community. Just like, well, this is the most basic economic part of our life. How are we cooking and eating together? And if we can, and so at the beginning, I was like, hey, do you guys want to share food? How do we want to do this? And now I'm like, oh, how could we be a communal household and not share food? Like, it's so essential to the small ways of giving and receiving belonging and love to one another, of saying, like, this food is our food. Like, we're in this together. The fact that that's being communicated every single day, basically, I think it took me years to notice of just like, oh, why do I feel like I'm not alone? Because I can come home and if there's extra food on the stove, I don't have to ask for something like, oh, like I might ask it if they have another purpose for it, but it is ours. And that's what, in a lot of ways, like breeds that family atmosphere, that actual connection of belonging. Um, so those have been two big dynamics around of just what does it mean to be a household? How do we share those responsibilities, expectations, um, and contrasting that from like a house of roommates versus a household that has um, common rhythms, common values, common economy, common care of the spaces, and then the food aspect of that just being so critical. And hospitality is one of our values. So we have a small covenant of just like, hey, here's our values, here's our practices, here's how things work. And so I wanted to create. So I was the main investor in this house, but we have set up a bank account that's actually owned by the community, not by me, so that all our money's going into that, with the goal one day of the property, more or less after it's paid off, will because there's a mortgage, will actually be also with the community's name on it, not mine. So that's the first answer to your question.
And of course, you touched on all kinds of other elements. So when you and Elena kind of came together, how did you move from this concept of household community grounded in a physical space in an actual neighborhood with actual people who will be kind of, sharing
Mm-hmm.
resources to implementation? Like, what were your
Mm-hmm.
implementation steps to start?
Yeah. Um, and just thinking about that, like 5 or 6 person team, that for us, just the house ended up being, kind of the right size for that. 5 people is kind of our norm. And, yeah, I am like, oh, really reflecting on more than that. And it starts multiplying the relationships in kind of a complicated way. And so it is a really sweet number when we're at that. Um, we started with so Elaine and I, talking, and then we had uh kind of maybe we took a bit of a leap of faith because I like Elaine and I chatted about this vision, and then 3 weeks later there was this house on the market, and it was within my 2 block radius search from some family at church because I wanted to have community near community. It's like these people I already care about, respect, want to build life with, and so I did a 2 block radius around them. And 3 weeks later, and I called Elena, Elena, there's a house on the market. How serious are you? She's like, oh, I mean, pretty serious, but like, I'd like to see it, and I'm out of town right now. And I just had to pray and take a leap of faith and hope that it would all work out. And I assumed that there could have been a way to back out, but I put it on an offer that weekend, and then she came and looked it up that Monday morning. And um, so then we were kind of like, okay, we have the space now. How are we going to do this? And we, for that first summer, a few of us moved in, but Elena moved in after her lease ended, like late summer. Just held weekly meetings, reading through um, Christine Pohl's book around on the 4 practices of community. Look it up. Um, and living into community, cultivating practices that sustain us. So Christine Pohl went into. Have you heard of her at all? Her work.
No, I'm actually just
The
looking this up now. Mhm.
uh, so she went into research hospitality in churches, and so she has another book on hospitality completely. Um, so she was trying to research hospitality, and the places that she found that practiced like rigorous hospitality were intentional Christian communities. And so then she ended up doing this whole other research of like, well, how do these communities work? What actually sustains their ability to do hospitality and as this foundation of community? So we were reading through this book on a weekly basis, just inviting other friends to say, hey, whoever's interested in these community conversations, let's just read a chapter and talk about it and start to build um, conversations and values and explore those values. So we then, with those who kind of came out of that as more core for initially jumping in together, um, collaborated on creating the list of values that formed the foundation of our covenant. So we kind of have like 6 main values and then practices that go underneath each of those and how we try to embody those values. And there was Elaine and I as kind of founders, we did have a structure of like covenant members versus practicing members. And so there were some authoritative calls on certain practices as we had younger, just out of college friends who were coming to join. I mean, I wasn't so far out of college, but I just remember there were some contention around like, um, are we a community? How do we define chastity, sexual faithfulness? And that was something that it felt really hard to. I wanted to make as few like constrictive rules as possible, in ways that felt like they inhibited others' freedoms. Um, there's only been one constrictive rule that we've added since the beginning, and that was no dating in the house. Because and that's something that Elena's like, for every woman I've talked to, that's been like, no, duh. I don't want the guys to be thinking me as like an option. I don't want that drama in my house. I need safety. And all the guys are like, I don't know, whatever. And it just shows some of those dynamics that are different,
Right.
of what hits people's sensitivities and radars, and what makes for a home that people can feel safe in.
Right.
Um, and I think a certain on the same page with regards to what our relationships are, on the same page for um, even I mean hospitality practices as well, but even the type of like sexual chastity play into the psychological safety for people making home together.
Right.
Um, and so that can be, I think, yeah, I've just built capacity for like um, understanding that safety for others is different than safety for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So if like just thinking about say these younger members that were joining or anybody else that may join in the life of this community, this household, um, what are your practices around reviewing your practices and
Hmm.
co-creating new practices or even reviewing the values? You know, Chinese telephone, it just kind of there's a way that it's in your
Yeah.
body and in Elena's body that a new person, how do you handing them
Hmm.
a covenant and say, read it through real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And we've sometimes had where it's like someone was like, hey, I kind of need a decision in the next 12 hours to tell my other housemate, after we're like interviewing them, like, well, did you read through the covenant? They're like, oh, I think I did. And then they're like, oh, I guess I actually didn't read through it all. And so like, oh man, okay, let's sit down, let's read through this, let's talk through this, like a little under the pressure. A gal ended up just being an incredible fit. But definitely it is especially, yeah, use that as a kind of onboarding of make it hard for someone to get in and easy to get out. Month to month kind of agreements, but like let's have a robust vision that is, of course, really embodied in just our practices. And so this is kind of a guiding document, a representation, a little bit of a filter for people to come in. And a few years ago, after COVID was kind of winding down, we had this period of intense intimacy because we are all together all the time in our COVID bubble. And then as we started being able to go out and do stuff, we felt that fray of disconnection. And so we went on maybe a 2-night cabin retreat as a house and did a more in depth of, okay, like what are our values? How have we seen us do well at these? What's been difficult, and where do we see Jesus calling us into living into this more? And that was a really good, just like in-depth time together to kind of rehash. I think we took people's notes on things, but we haven't done any serious revisions yet. We're 6 years in. But right now, as we're talking about, okay, we're also rooted in this neighborhood. We have relationships with Latino neighbors that we didn't have before. What modification to our covenant is needed to make it language accessible for someone who's English as a second language? And also maybe reflect some of the ways that we've grown, some of the ways that we want to learn and incorporate from Hispanic culture or other cultures. And so that is very much kind of on the menu for this year for a more significant consideration, as we also have um, Elena likely, we're in the discernment right now of her leaving, which would make me the only one who's been here for 6 years, and the other housemates, no one here for more than a year if Elena leaves. So that's a significant shift and a good time for a little bit of revisioning or reassessing our foundation.
Um,
And
well,
I know you have a lot of, I know right now you're asking me lots of questions, but I'm sure you'll have good wisdom to share too.
I'm trying to learn like there's something about, oh, I have a thought. And then there's like, wait, is that a question people are asking? And then, and then just trying to figure out, yeah, what are the invitations for the various thoughts? So I have 100 thoughts, but I am curious about, so I love this retreat that you did and kind of rehashing. And I'm wondering about, do you have roles within the community that then can hold whatever is discovered? In other words, is that just you and Elena gonna process this meta processing of what happened at the retreat? Is that just you and Elena, or is there a way for the community, the household, to kind of take that all in,
Mm,
and different people have different, the equivalent of I collect eggs on a Tuesday, you know? I just
mm-hmm.
wonder what are some of your thoughts, maybe even if it's not something you're doing yet, what are some of your thoughts on, yeah, how that distilling and alchemizing can be done by the community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the people that we went on the retreat with was a couple years ago, so we have a pretty different subset now. Where yeah, Elaine and I are the only ones who are on that same retreat. But the question, there's the like, it makes me think about the relationship between the organic nature of just you bringing a few people together and what roles do we play and how do we interact with each other, versus just some of the like structural roles of Elaine and I as covenant members that have the authority to make changes in the covenant, but we don't do that without input and data collection from the whole community and listening to their voices and getting their iterative feedback. And um, the question around like, oh yeah, what roles do different people play? Um, I think of one housemate who is kind of like, oh yeah, like pretty good with everything that goes, and the other one who's got more like, oh, I more sensitivities, more questions, want more processing, and like my brain maybe first processes that is like, oh, where might be their friction, or whose needs do I need to um kind of not cater to, but take into account. And but there's also a re-envisioning of that, of like, oh, that person has a role that will give us more thoughtfulness, help us slow down. And Elena in general has been that like, I'm the like, it'll be fine, let's run forward. And Elena's the like, let's be cautious, let's assess risks. And she's kind of worried if she leaves, is David just gonna go up and bound? And I'm like, I hope now that I've lived enough with Elena, I'll have kind of, imbibed that her wisdom, and I kind of rely on her to do that now. And then if she's gone, I know that I can't offset that to her. I'll need to either bring other people into that, or I'll need to own some of that processing myself.
How have you, so I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I will get to that maybe after the recording or to the end. How have you like handled difference and conflict? Like, is that a specific process? Is that a more intuitive, organic noticing? Is it both? How did it
Mm-hmm.
come about? Whatever it is that you do. Or are you all just
Mm-hmm.
not having conflict, which would be its own kind of
Oh,
curiosity?
I would be worried if there wasn't conflict. That would mean that I would be probably a domineering leader that people are afraid to make things down to. So thank God we have conflict. We have a monthly house meeting where we try to make intentional space for people to add their own agenda items. Again, often dishes, or someone's like, hey, can we address this clutter? Can we address this thing that, for them, the physical space really impacts them in a way that it doesn't impact me? It's off my radar. And so they have the ability for things that are on their radar to bring it to the monthly house meeting and set it as an agenda item. And so I think that's the most way that we have like an intentional space for addressing conflict. I know other communities that have very regular times of grievance airing, like on a weekly basis of saying, hey, I'm just going to confess, here's how I know I've done wrong to others. And then others have a time to say, here's how have felt hurt, and they can reconcile. Um, and yeah, we haven't implemented anything that kind of structural. Um, and outside of that monthly house meeting, the rest is organic and intuitive of trying to notice, oh, that person seems a little stressed out. What's going on? That was an odd reaction. How can I, you know, try to check in on that relationship, check in with them, and either invite them, like, if something comes up, oh, great, let's talk about that more at a house meeting, or hey, let's get breakfast and, kind of hash this through a little bit. And that is like the I mean, especially 5 people from 5 different households and histories and backgrounds, of how much relational time it takes to figure out how to live well together, and it's never a done deal.
Right.
And I I used to work full time as an engineer, and when I was doing that plus carrying a lot of other random responsibilities on weekends and evenings, there was a sense that the house felt just a little like neglected. And I was like, man, like these relationships need time. The house in some ways just maybe needs some more of my presence, but the relationships need investment. And so when I was able to leave that job to pursue part-time work, and at that time was a little bit of a sabbatical too, but there was in part, it was like, oh, my community needs like me to be more present. And there was a friend at church who's like, oh, this kind of reminds me, like the only frame of reference he had was like a parent being like, oh, I need to like deprioritize my work because my family needs more time. And I was like, oh yeah, it's like no different. These are people that need to be invested in, and those connections maintained, built up. And there, yeah, the community doesn't just happen with good structures. There has to be a lot of time for just the being, which creates the opportunity for intuitive or organic connection.
So outside of your own noticing in these organic times, and then your own kind of tending as you see, is it that others will, are there community maybe ideals or embodiments of community values that another person might use to resolve an ache or an ouch? And do people have this on
Yeah.
people's fingertips, or in other words, how are you not just being a two? Um, as it takes one to know one. Um,
Yeah. And Elena she has described herself as the canary in the coal mine of like, she feels it, the stress in the atmosphere, before she can name it and way before I feel it. Um, so in previous household iterations, there's been times of some just kind of underlying instability, and she was like, there's things that aren't right. Um, and once she could put it to words, I could conceptualize it and understand it because of my years in community. Um, but I don't like feel it as quick as her. The In response to your question, I've seen housemates go, like on an issue of clutter, go back to the household values and say, "Hey, one of our values is simplicity, and we have this excessive collection of whatever." And so they're able to use those values to give voice to their concern, which I think is both hopefully emboldens them to say, yeah, what I'm bothered by matters. Um, eh, and it also helps draw us back to say, oh, yeah, what does simplicity look like? And we can like have that conversation together. And whether that's, oh, you're right, let's lean into this, or oh, that's not a let's tweak this a little bit. That's not exactly how I understand the value of simplicity as it's lived out in our household, and why we might need this many cutting boards or something. And Elaborate more on your question around the Enneagram too.
Well, no, there's a way that because I don't know about you, but um, me and a friend, she's an Enneagram 1, but we still have similar
Mm,
issues in terms of this when we're leaders. People give us problems to solve, or we perceive that people are giving us problems to solve. And maybe people aren't handing the problem over, but we see it and it joins our mental list of problems to
mm,
solve, right? And that's different from and as my two-ness gets to it, I solve it to
mm,
remove the feeling, because it's my way of offering care. So I have a kid who's
mm-hmm,
traveling to Germany in a week, an adult human, and I'm like, you are not going to manage your backpack in these airports. And I already have the new backpack with the wheels in the Amazon cart. It's such a fast, but it's so much simpler than a consultative process. I just if they
mm-hmm,
want a backpack, I'll keep it. And so there's a way that in community we can sit in that role of whether it's our two-ness or the fact that we've been in church leadership for so long or whatever, in that role of I see what needs to be done and I facilitate the doing of it versus
mm,
this other question of how are people being how are we helping people's discernment process of what's needed? Why does this adult human not know or is not even thinking about the back
mm,
that's not going to work, and
mm-hmm,
what's my offering there in the thought process, which is a much slower. It's staying in the
mm-hmm,
discomfort of the 100 cutting boards for a bit to say, how come this is, where else have we seen this in the system? How come it's happening? Who's not noticing? What's the, just like it's a little bit further back. And so I guess I see, although it's easy for me to kind of be a meta processor, my two-ness has me, let me just solve it. And let me just lean in. And
mm-hmm.
yeah. So that was kind of what was floating around in my mind.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, for me personally, I have my so Enneagram 2, Wing 1, and my top strength usually ranks as responsibility. And so that can definitely go into of like, oh, this person is struggling with this. How can I, you know, it can go to the extent of enablement. Just like I'm so in there becoming one of their own working muscles, instead of that more consultative, like give them ownership. And I'm like outside of the house, have, like relationships where I'm trying to be that support to them. And I'm really trying to lean in towards like, I'm not going to do anything unless at the very least they're giving me the like thumbs up. And that can be really hard. It's like, well, I know they need this. I like, can we just do this? Like, can I just like almost force this upon them? And where I'm like destroying their will, which is actually what that needs to be bolstered up and empowered, is for them to be really being intentional. Like, oh, I have a will, I have a choice, I have power in my life, and how do I use that and steward that? Within the house, there's an interesting dynamic of um, having I don't know the right language around, I have a looser sense of like me and we. And so I sometimes, my sense of responsibility, then, the we of this household, I loop them into the say, oh, I've taken this responsibility on, and I have, without any communication, placed that on we, because it's responsibilities that I just naturally be like, oh, this neighbor is trying to throw a block party or needs this help, and we're doing this, and so let's do it. And I skip from their need outside the house into us as a team being able to do it. And everyone else was like, "Wait, what need? What are you talking about? Who's that
Right.
neighbor? Uh, do I have any capacity for that or energy? Like, do I get a say in what's going on?" And I'm like, "But they have a need, don't you know?" uh, and so that's been the dynamic where I've had to really um, listen back in to the members of this body of the house and say, "Oh, I can't I how do I do that collaborative work to invite them into their needs and responsibilities that I see outside the house?" Um, and so like, hey, try to put on the radar. There's a block party in 2 months, and we know that this neighbor really loves it, but really can't physically do much to make it happen. How can we be there, and be supportive and set aside time in our schedules? It would mean a lot to the neighborhood. It would mean a lot to me, and and invite them into that work, and not just assume that they're going to take responsibility for something in the same way that I would just naturally
Right.
take that responsibility on myself. And so um, yeah, and in that way that I'm so externally oriented towards the needs of others, but then my own house can be neglected. And because that's just like, oh, this is where I live. And I'm assuming that we'll all kind of do what we need to keep this operation running a little bit. And uh, other people have higher standards of what they need this household to look like. And so I have to do the extra work, actually. It's kind of, yeah, a little counterintuitive. Um, but to think about, oh, how clean is this living room right now? How does that impact me? Not very much. I like it when it's clean. It benefits me, but I don't get like torn down if it's not tidied up. But what is that doing for the mental health of my housemates? Okay, let's put in some extra work here towards the internal care. So there's an interesting, just off of my wiring, that my whole household becomes kind of part of my internalized kind of neglect if I don't do extra work.
That's interesting because I've seen that a couple of times, not with I do what you do with the external with the internal, and that adds a lot of pressure to me. But I've been in relationships where the closer I get to the person, the more integrated I become, then their own neglect spills out as, there's a
Mm,
now that you're here in my heart. It's
mm-hmm.
okay. The stuff that I can ignore, the thorn I'm sitting on, you know, you can ignore too. Why are you making a big deal?
Yeah, yeah.
And just being aware, it's such an interesting reflection that community is the place where our own internal healing or non-healing, shows up. Like, because it's
Mm-hmm.
harder for us to, in this case you're describing, shift from neglect of self. But when that neglect of self starts to impact another, then it becomes this mirror, back to,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and in my case, it's the over responsibility um, of the other, when the other is like, I see these people as myself, these humans in my household. I see them as myself, but I also see them as representations of my ideal self. And so then, I really need to, whatever the thing is that they need. And when they don't, then it is as if I'm harming myself while I continue to harm myself. I'll continue to not do it for myself, but there's a way that my integration of them. And it just is a place to show up. Yeah, the healing that can
Mm-hmm.
come. So that's kind of
One of the ways that the care of others works positively for me is that if I were living solo, I think my diet wouldn't be very good. But when it's like, oh, um, and it's maybe improved over the years, but like I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make some good eggs and toast this morning, and then I naturally share with my two other housemates who are around. And there's a little bit of like, oh, I planned for one housemate, but then another one shows up, so I'm gonna die to self and give that, and then make some my own. But also, there's so often where I'm making better meals because I get to share it with other people than I would ever just make for myself. And I'd say that's been a big theme of it's allowing that love of others. When it's a communal thing, it naturally includes a love of self.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to clean up this space for them. Oh, this is actually really good for me too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've said to people that the with is my word for 2025, but it's really just my word for my life. Or I notice that
Hmm.
that's what happens, that I will do with and for. And so I kind of God sneaks my own care up on me through the with and the for. And so I look at a person and say, "Oh, this is, and let me help with this." And as I'm helping, Holy Spirit is kind of like that thing. And
Hmm.
so I become the beneficiary of my own good gift while
Hmm.
alongside a person in a way that I wouldn't sustain in this present moment on my own.
Hmm. Hmm.
So true. So as people, two questions, and then I think those are my two last questions. As people have come and gone, what's been your process? Because you've mentioned Elena and the discernment, which doesn't sound
Hmm.
like a similar process to, I'm not sure, is it? What's been the process for other people coming and going? And how come it's different? Is it different with Elena?
Hmm. There's some housemates who come in very knowledgeably. Hey, I'm going to grad school in a year. Like their timelines are pretty fixed. We know we asked them to try to stay for at least a year. And so we kind of have on our radar of when it might change. Um, Other housemates, we, especially once they've become more established, really invite this into like, hey, like we belong to each other, and so like let's not just leave and at pretending we're individuals. And we had one housemate who was starting to like, oh, hey, this might be this thing, and we're like, oh, okay, and then it was like, oh, I'm doing it, and we're like, whoa, hey, like you kind of went from like a vague hypothetical that we didn't think was very likely to like doing it. And he's like, oh, I didn't realize, yeah, that I didn't actually include you guys in that at all. But a previous housemate where we got to take the time to pray and say, hey, there's this other opportunity to start a community. Here's some benefits to our housemate. Here's some benefits for that community. Here's the cost. What are our capacities right now? And we took the time to pray, and we could say, yes, we're going to send you as a community into this other community that's just going to start. And we did this final. We were able. It's a like a 2 hour walk from our house, so we did this actual sending of walking this housemate and their dog to the other community, where then we like finished off with dessert and ceremonialized it, that like, yeah, like we come from community and into community. We aren't just isolated individuals making independent choices. So it's there's this small ways that we're trying to invite people into like, and it's not always, it's like, well, it's not per se a community vote, but Elena doesn't want to leave without a blessing and support. And so it's this very organic, like it's not mechanical authority about who can she do this, is she free to, but it's like we want to reinforce um the goodness of what our relationships are as we come and go. um and on the coming, there's a little bit, we have a just application, get to know you, but more and more, especially if there's a higher year of turnover, trying to um source from people we already know, just to decrease the amount of work it is to bring someone new into the home, because that's like, oh yeah, it's a you who's going to join the we, and so that's a lot of getting to know you, and so the more we already know you, the more that will make sense, and be less of integrating a stranger into our personal like hearts.
So there's a sense where the nature of the leaving process and ritual depends on the person and like how it was set up at the beginning and maybe even what the person is inviting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
their
Mm-hmm.
process of leaving. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what's been what's in your heart right now as say next steps, next stage? What do you see in the future? And what's the
Mm-hmm.
thing you feel invited into right now as you kind
Mm.
of look ahead to the future?
Yeah, I think it's definitely with the possibility that we'll have, or the likelihood of some open rooms in the next months. Think about this: seed has been planted, it's been watered, it's been cultivated in the soil. And so where are its roots now? How is it growing? And the shifts that reflect more and more of our neighborhood. And so someone who was just visiting to say, oh, what would it look like to live here? It's like, oh yeah, you're already part of, you don't live too far from the neighborhood. You're walking distance. Like, how do we start sourcing more from the networks that we're building up locally to reinforce localism, to reinforce the neighborhood that like we are part of the neighborhood and we want to help the neighborhood sustain investment in itself. So I think that's something I'm excited to lean into and um, pull from the networks that we're developing here or praying for opportunities to do so. And so that might be a first or second generation immigrant, because we're in an immigrant heavy neighborhood, of pulling from those circles rather than from the just like general Christian circles that we have that are a little bit more widespread. And I'm excited for how that will change in some ways, change the identity of the house, or establish it in another way.
Does it feel like um the pulling is for members or for additional resourcing and supports? Like, is this about the neighborhood's economy as well as supporting people more locally? Or tell me more about which way or which ways when you say pull.
Mm.
Yeah.
Uh, for me, it's at one basic level, I love when my life is a bunch of Venn diagrams. I don't like having isolated spheres of like, oh, these people I live with, these people I worship with, these people I like work with. It's like too disintegrated. Conflicts of interest should be the norm if we are doing business and community organizing the right way. And we just have to hold those with wisdom. And and so it is a allowing our house to be more of a Venn diagram with our local community and um and so that culturally also just this model of like living together in a way that's both very normal for our immigrant neighbors in terms of intergenerational living, but also very abnormal as a bunch of single adults that they don't uh yeah, previous neighbor Jesus was like, are you and talking to Elena, are you and David married? Oh no, we're all single here. I guess that's okay for white people. Uh you just didn't have a vision for it to not be family that are doing that. So how do we make a little bit of this model more culturally accessible? And so maybe inviting folks from different cultures into it that they can literally force to recalculate it as not just a white person thing. Um, and I don't know if I'm getting to the heart of your question, but to me, it's just about building that overlap so that the cultures and the relationships are more interconnected, and in a way that it does feel like our house is serving and integrating with the neighborhood more because we are also a pretty transient neighborhood, lots of renters. And so, how are we helping people actually see the neighborhood as a place to invest in and not a place to just survive for so many years and then move out? Because, like, that's what makes a neighborhood like not good, is if no one's investing in it. Someone's got to care for the commons and and so I want to be a part of enabling neighbors to say, "Oh, I could be here and care about it,
Yeah.
and not just have to like move around wherever I don't, can find a landlord that's not going to be mean."
Yeah. It's a like that macro micro thing of or macro. It's the what you've done is build this interdependency within a household and or maybe reinforce it, and then so the question now, if you step out a little bit, is how does this household become interdependent within this neighborhood? So how do we be
Mm-hmm.
neighbors? How do we have neighbors? versus the what happens in the house of roommates also happens in a neighborhood of houses where everybody is on
Mm-hmm.
their own and then leaves to do work and and so I guess the question of how to be a neighbor and how to have neighbors. I
Mm-hmm.
had a situation a few years ago where my son, I don't know if I said this when we were at the weekend, my son took the AC out of the window and went out. So he left the house. He escaped and we didn't know. Um, and went into a house, few houses down. And when I'm in a largely white neighborhood, went into a house, two houses down, went into their mudroom and was checking their refrigerator out. And so the police came, person called the police came, and it's my worst nightmare to have the thought of my son being in in the proximity to law enforcement. Um, and as I kind of went through it, the cops were really cool. They remembered we'd had an incident the previous year where he had a seizure, and it was almost like the small town in some ways, and they remembered the address so they followed him home. He ran out and walked up to our house, and they just followed him home. He opened the window and went back in through the window, and then they rang the doorbell and came up, saw him. I by that time in his bed. So while I felt the familiarity of those police officers and the sense of sort of being known, the neighbor gave our address to adult services, and we were visited by a social worker. And I felt
Mm-hmm.
that social worker basically saying, somebody's concerned about my son's care. And I was like, neighbors don't do that. Like if you're if you know my address, to the point where you can send somebody, you can walk along on your own legs over and say, "Hey, is Jaden okay? You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
you okay?" And so there's something I I I kind of developed this. Neighbors don't call cops on neighbors. In some
Mm-hmm.
ways, there's a way to be a neighbor, and there is a turning on
Mm-hmm.
that the same care as I'm checking. Do I need food? And then I take that out. Do my kids need anything? Then there's a take that out. Who's needing something, or I need something? Who's there with that thing? And those
Mm-hmm.
skills are so, yeah, have been eroded for so many reasons.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
We have the Haitian block leader. She's a force to be reckoned with. And has invited me into those opportunities to actually be a neighbor. And will say, "Hey, did you hear that screaming? Is there a house that we should go stop by and see if they're all right?" That's how she's thinking about things.
that's cool. That's cool. Did you hear that screaming? That's because you probably did, or somebody did. But just even somebody asking that question, and like, is there a response in our own hearts?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of cool. Thank you. I
Yeah.
I don't have any more questions. I have 100 thoughts, but I would prefer them not to be recorded.
Oh, well, I look forward to the next time we can connect, Faith.